buying land and housing, being able to do things around setting up mayoral development corporations, doing things that would increase economic vitality at a local area. But very importantly, none of those powers take anything away from local planning authorities or local housing authorities. They are simply additional powers we don't have at the moment that are coming down from national government. We also have the power to create a more integrated transport plan. And I'm sure many members have seen the great work that some combined authorities have done about trying to really look at transport in an integrated way across a footprint. The West Midlands, Greater Manchester are great examples of that. It gives you the opportunity for bus franchising at a different scale. Really powerful to do smart integrated ticketing services, and you're really looking at how you do transport over a much larger geography and have more powers to do that. So quite a change for us at this level in locally. We recognise, and I talked to members about this at a previous member briefing, the East Midlands at the moment, per capita of funding it gets into public services is much lower than other parts of the country. This devolution arrangement that the government have put in brings more money to those other areas. So we are falling behind in some of that investment that we get in the East Midlands because we haven't got this structure. And that's really the nub, if you like, of the reason why we think this is a good thing to do. So it would give us that much more fair share of what we would get at a national level. So we've talked about how we work together on carbon reduction and net zero. How do we really maximise our ability to do that? How do we improve regional transport? How do we get better skills and support to our local jobs and our economy? Take advantage of the economies of scale by using our budgets in different ways and building more homes and more affordable homes and more efficient homes. So it is about trying to do some of these things we're already doing ourselves, but doing it on a different scale with different funding and different power we haven't at the moment got. As members have said at the beginning of this conversation, we have obviously had a debate at Council on the deal that's been offered so far, and that deal is at this moment out to consultation. So we are asking for comments from across the regional area, from our stakeholders, from businesses, from our colleges and universities, from a variety of partners, but also from our residents and what they think about this as a way of bringing more of those powers down to the local level. Consultation is taking place now. It ends on the 9th of January. And if that then comes back to council, and as Alex has said, a council decision, and the four councils, they want to accept that deal and then move forward to government to allow a combined authority to be created, there's still a legislation requirement. At the moment, there is no legislation or framework to create a county combined authority. That is going through in the Levelling Up bill. If that all happens, then the first election for a regional mayor would be in May 2024, if all those things, work through in the way they're expected to, which is not actually guaranteed. As I said, the consultation is open until the 9th of January. It's really important to get as many people having their say as possible, which is why we have this conversation here. Open to everybody. There will be, obviously, an analysis taken part and considered, and those consultation responses will be taken into account as part of the next stage when those four councils consider, obviously, the proposal in the spring of next year. And just briefly, just to reinforce what I've already said, I think really the main benefits are we would be one of the largest combined authorities, a £2.2 million for the people in our combined area. We have much better influence, bigger influence at a higher level to do things locally for local people. It is about getting on the same footing as other partners across the country, so the West Midlands, Greater Manchester. The benefits you get from being a combined authority are manifest, and we are not getting them at the moment. So we'd really get that benefit. And it does give us a chance to not be constrained by some of those requirements we have at national funding regimes, get much more flexibility about how we would use that funding locally for the needs of our communities. And as I said, the combined authorities have become quite a standing feature of our system in this country, and they have continued to get further deals, and built more and more things into their portfolios to do more effective things. And that's for the future, whether that's around public health, or about some other sort of things we want to look at. But this is an opportunity to start, if you like, the East Midlands on that journey to have more of those powers brought down from government to the local area. So just reinforce that, more funding, more control, better future, if you can say that, more investment, be able to do more around economic growth, skills, jobs, housing, etc., and power being much more in local politicians' hands as opposed to national politicians. Happy to take any questions, Heather and I can both try and take those.
Before I bring other members in, a few semi-parochial things, but we're talking about better control over housing. Will we get any better control locally over housing? The sort of housing that both local people and local councillors want in the city, and not be actually driven by cowboys and developers who seem to be driven by, well, are driven by the profit motive. What control will we have? Will we have any extra controls over planning to make sure that, for instance, with regard to the problem and to many people's minds in many parts of the city, the scourge of the growing number of HIMOs going up in various parts of the city in concentrations, where in this city, unlike Nottingham and elsewhere, we have little or no control. Will we get more control over that? That's one question. And the second question is, what about the problem of housing land banking by developers? At the moment, we have developers sitting on large amounts of houses which haven't been released for building homes that we actually need, family homes that they're desperate need for. What powers, if any, will we have to sort of break into that land that's been banked and make sure, possibly by compulsory purchase order, it's open for the housing? You could answer those, and then I'll bring other people in. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, as I said, during the quick presentation, this doesn't take away any of the local planning authority powers or the local housing authority powers, and we would remain as a local authority, a planning authority and a housing authority. So all those powers still are in existence, and we can use them to the best of our ability. There is no new powers to deal with some of those issues that you talked about. There wouldn't be new powers specifically around dealing with some of those things, but it would enable us to work much more in collaboration with our partners across the region to raise the profile of some of those things and to bring up new initiatives to fix some of those things potentially, or to try and address some of those things. It doesn't change the planning system, and the planning system is what allows some of those issues to take place, like the land banking from developers. The planning system allows that to happen. This wouldn't change that in its entirety, but it would give you more chance to work more collectively with other councils in the same area to try and lobby for that more effectively and think of different ways of trying to solve some of those problems.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just the fundamental of the headline sort of funding, 38 million quid. I mean, maybe this has already been discussed before, but in 30 years' time, 38 million pounds, if we have 11% inflation or even 2 or 3% inflation, will be dramatically lower in real terms, won't it? So, presumably some discussion around going back and renegotiating at some point, or is that it? 30 years, do we end up with like the equivalent of probably 15 million quid in 30 years' time?
Yeah, I mean, I think Simon might know the more official answer to this or the more technical answer to this, but the funding that is given to combined authorities, as the funding that's given to councils, clearly it goes through a cycle every cycle, comprehensive spending review. Those things are still applicable. So it isn't outside of that model. So there would be, there's a chance to renegotiate a new deal for new funding to do new issues at any time in certain cycles, but there would be, it isn't 38 million and it's just going to be that forever and no inflationary increases. There would be a recognition that the public sector would require additional funding, and there would be additional opportunities to get more money from them in that period. I've put it really badly, haven't I? You've spent better than me, Simon.
So a recent select committee said that their immediate planning assumptions do not inflation-proof the allocations. But as Rachel says, every spending review will reappraise the needs of all models of government, and you would normally expect to see in that increases in the allocations through the comprehensive spending review. But the select committee said at the moment the figures are not inflation-proofed. But as Rachel says, it's likely to happen every 3 or 5 years as we have comprehensive spending reviews. Thank you.
Super quick. I mean, if we're signing up to some sort of deal, are we not just signing up to 38 million quid? I mean, where does it say we can renegotiate?
The answer for that, if you look at Greater Manchester, they've had 10 years of a combined authority. The deal they did at the very beginning of that was, a number, And then they've got additional funding, you know, almost every time it's been a cycle, additional funding for additional things. So now they are, Greater Manchester has got, you know, it's quite a large organisation with a lot of power and a lot of influence that didn't have at the very beginning. So this is a model of organising local government, if you like, that is the way the government sees a devolving power, and that method enables you to get access to things you haven't got at the moment. And that would be we have that method in our grasp to get from. So although the deal is the deal, there will be further deals, there will be further opportunities. Once you've got a combined authority, you're then in that club. That makes sense. That we're not at the moment. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yes, Chair, I'm also quite sceptical about that funding thing, and I think it's something that we should, if we're taking on responsibility, we should be having an index-linked funding for the responsibilities that we're taking on now, rather than to feel that we have to take on more and more and more, because otherwise we haven't got the funding to deal with the basics that we originally signed up for. And that just means a sort of squeezed budget and not doing anything particularly well. So I think that, Chair, is one of the things that we ought to be particularly thinking about. But I was hoping to sort of put a bit more structure on this, in that the consultation paper and behind the consultation online, which sadly the way I read it, it's a very closed consultation. It's saying this is what's been negotiated. Do you like it or not? And obviously the hope is that we do like it, because if not, there's going to be egg on people's faces. But rather than saying, if we're going to have another tier of coordination across this geographic area, what would we like it to do? And that is the question I would like it to have been asked, but that's not the one we are being asked. So given that we've got the structure as we are, on the page 3 of the what do they call it, proposal document, it still said a draft proposal because it's not gone through legislation, I presume. There are the 4 priorities. Now, when it was introduced, Rachel, just now, your 4 priorities were housing, transport, skills and economic development. Here, it's housing, skills, transport and net zero, which came in as a 5th one in the presentation. And then we have a set of principles, 4 principles plus 4 additional principles as to work on that. And those that I think are the key things that we are being asked on the consultation to think about, and I think those are the key things I think we ought to be responding on. In terms of the homes, we already have a duty to cooperate regarding housing and planning. So what this adds to that duty to cooperate, I'm not entirely clear, except that we've got this other body which can do more land purchasing and organising and the like. But if the duty to cooperate is already working, then hopefully we're already working with our neighbours in a way that is meaningful. And then there's the lump sum of this extra money that we're getting for doing something immediately. In terms of skills, I think skills are really important for the future, but I think we need to identify what skills are needed. And this is where the strategic thinking comes in. That some things are obvious. We know we need more doctors, we need more nurses. We also need more people who know about tool making in the mechanical engineering industry. We are desperately short of tool makers. But that may just be a Derby thing, or it may be wider. And there may be other things like that that we need to be flagging up and saying, these are gaps. We don't need hundreds of these people, but we do need enough of these people to make sure that our industry thrives. So the strategic work here, which isn't mentioned, should be looking at what skills we need. Maybe it's the bullet point there, shaping the local skills improvement plan. I've never heard of a local skills improvement plan, but this would be a sub-regional skills improvement plan, not local. So maybe that is something that we need to specifically talk about. Transport infrastructure, I think, is more obvious. We all drive across the boundaries without thinking about where they are. But there is some consolidation of what you want to do where and what the standards are going to be. There's been suggestions that we should be doing more 20 miles per hour here. There has been in the county, in Derbyshire. I don't know what the situation is in Nottingham and Nottinghamshire. I picked up one there on skills, Chair. But I'm hoping that other people. Hopefully, I've said this in a way that where people feel there is something that needs to be picked up, they will do. But I'm also hoping that other people will be picking up these thoughts and producing other thoughts. Okay. In terms of net zero, I think this is something, still on page 4, this is something which has enormous scope to do a lot more, because we know that majority of councils have set zero carbon targets and the majority of them are not really being able to deliver on them. We know that National Grid, who used to be Western Power Distribution, have asked local authorities to do a local energy network study thing. I don't think, I'd be surprised if any of the local authorities have actually got the capacity to do that. It's something, again, that we should be doing as a strategic thing because there are gaps. And once we have that plan, it'll make it clearer where we have potential for power, maybe from the rivers, maybe from wind turbines, and where there is a need for that to be provided. We've got lots of roofs, we need to put PVs on them, and we should be doing a big study on that. Again, it's not specifically here. I myself am really sceptical about the mention within this area of saying that we're going to go for new forms of clean energy, which means fusion, which was going to be 40 years ago when I was at school, more than 40 years ago. And I think that 30 years in hence, it may still be 25 years away. So we can't assume that fusion is where that we're going in the future. We need to do other things and we need to do them soon. I'm just moving on to the principles, Chair. So principle 1 is effective leadership. Personally, I don't think the best sorts of leadership come through elected mayors, and I'm also sceptical about appropriate accountability coming from the already very busy leaders and probably deputy leaders in the higher tier councils. And I think there needs to be a way of dealing with that which puts in people into those positions who have more time than those named people are going to have, because they don't have it already. I'm not, the sensible geography, if based on counties, is what it is, but I'm not convinced how much connection there is between Nottingham and High Peak, for example. Flexibility, the deal recognises the unique needs and ambitions of the area in its governance and programme. Well, quite frankly, I'm not sure what flexibility of that is supposed to mean. Maybe it has more to do with opportunities in the future. The inclusivity and looking at constituent councils and choice, which also seems to relate to the constituent councils at the lower level, seem to be, again, words with not a lot of substance behind them. Subsidiarity, yes, we are moving things down from London, but some of them are coming back up again. Well, one or two things like the sort of some of the transport, strategic transport, and some of the strategic planning, maybe moving upwards a bit. And the commissioning, again, I'd very much like to know a bit more about what we think commissioning is, in a way that we can't already do, because we are already doing joint commissioning across the D2N2 area, for example, on things to do with fostering or whatever. So I don't see what big additional benefit we're getting in the commissioning element there. But the things that we can be doing, the gaps that we have, which we are unable to fill, we also ought to be thinking of those. And for me, the biggest are the ones I mentioned on climate change, and they're also there to do with skills. It was an 8th as well. Now, I threw that in with number 5, Chair. But in the climate change one, I'll just mention one other thing, which is holding up our progress on climate change is not just skills, but it's materials. If we have £38 million coming into the region, that's enough to build ourselves a factory to be manufacturing the insulation and the PV panels that we need to be able to deliver on climate change. And if it's new money, maybe we won't miss it, but we could do something really big and forward-looking with it for the first couple of years, such as that, and then we would be set up for the future. Sorry, Chair. There are going to be some minutes written from this discussion, and I will see when those minutes are circulated to us, hopefully fairly soon, before our next meeting. We'll see which of the things that I feel are important have not been picked up in the minutes, and I can then elaborate on those if needed.
If there are gaps in that,
I will elaborate.
because, you know, in fairness to Stephen, I can see his biro was almost seizing up.
But Chair, this meeting, the meet,
You did make a lot of valid points.
the meeting is also being recorded.
And I want to make sure that we capture every gem that you actually spoke earlier.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
If you're not happy with all the gems that
Yeah, I'm not going to answer all of those points. I think I probably can't do that really. I was going to make a couple of quick points. I think the first to make is that we are a unitary state and we only exist on the back of government allowing us to exist at all structures. We have no power ourselves, do we? We are sovereign as a council. We are completely dependent on national government. The national government in this country, very centralised, they have determined this is a way to devolve powers down to local areas. Then this is up to us whether we want to take that way or not. There's no other way. This is the way they've determined it to be. One of the key things about what we've seen nationally around combined authorities being effective across the country is absolutely, as Lucy and Kara said, that strategic approach to looking at these things over a whole region gives you that opportunity to economies of scale, doing things differently. We know transport skills, our businesses want to understand what the skills journey looks like across the patch rather than individual places. But the biggest thing really is the national voice. It's someone to speak up for the East Midlands in that national conversation. And I think anyone would, answer, the Mayor of the West Midlands, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, the profile they have, they're listened to by government in a way that we just don't seem to cut through. That's one of the most important benefits. But I would just reiterate, this is the start of a journey, not the end of one. But yeah, really good comments from Councillor Kerr. I'll take them into account. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, we've rehearsed a lot of this at full council. So it's more a question of, there's one particular issue, the consultation for me, the Scotland question. So, if different parts, are we going to break down the consultation between different parts of the D2N2 geography? And if we are not, why not? Because there could be, and then obviously I understand that each authority has to ratify. If it doesn't happen, I assume that it can't go ahead if one or more of the local authorities, the 4 local authorities, say no after the consultation. So that's one bit. The other bit is just re-emphasising that point about £38 million in 30 years is not going to be worth what we think it should be worth. On the base, and on top of that, we already know that the current settlement is one of the first amount of settlements that was at the beginning of the mayoral processes, not current funding that's being made available after negotiation. So not only are we in danger of losing the cash element through inflation in terms of value, but we're starting at a much earlier point. And therefore, in terms of it's the original offer as opposed to what has been negotiated and the current better offers that local mayoral authorities have been able to negotiate.
Thanks, Nigel. Before I ask Rachel to come back, I'll ask Alison to make her contribution. Then respond.
Thank you, Chair. Just a simple question, comment really. In the light of recent government turmoil and U-turns, of which there have been so many, hard to stay on top of any of this, I just wonder to what extent we are confident that this process, to which so much time and attention is being given, will actually proceed in the timescales given, or will there be a deferral, or will there be a change in government direction and the funding available? I mean, we've put a lot of effort this year. I know it's not exactly the same thing, but we all put a lot of effort in urging the government to bring the Great British Railways to Derby, and that has been on hold and is potentially may well be cancelled. So I'm just wondering to what extent we can be assured of this initiative actually going ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, obviously, as far as I'm concerned, it is way too late now for councillors to have their first say on a proposal that's already been signed off by the government and by the council. We should have been involved in this much earlier. The 38 million, you said it was new money. I don't believe it's new money. We don't know what money the government currently spends on this. This is money coming down. It could actually be a financial cut rather than an increase. We have no comparison to make. This is not new money as such and is unlikely to go very far. My other main concern on page 29, Councillor Poulter has said that it won't cost us anything. It will not be a financial burden on this council. Page 29, the CCA will be funded by the 4 constituent councils. Now, I know it goes on to say that some deal has been struck, but there is funding that will be involved and it will cost this council a lot of money, as well as the inhabitants of this city. Are we prepared to burden them with more council tax to cover what could be a £10 million office fee alone for running such an office? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose I want to keep it quite short and simple. For me, I think we focus on the reality is that these devolution deals are happening all around us. We don't want to be Derby, the island in the middle where everything else is being dealt with and we've just sat there. I think it's important that we get part of it. And within the devolution proposal summary that is out there, it says very simply, the devolution deal is the beginning of the journey, not the end. There would be opportunities to build and enhance this over time, as has happened in other areas. That to me is the focus of what the potential of this can bring to the city. And my understanding from the finances element is that this is the funding that is available is to pay for that. The money from government is to pay for that facility, and I'd much rather those decisions being made in the East Midlands than by people in London. And I've seen, we see things all the time. We've got streets of Derby that are owned by people in London that don't even realise they own them. There are elements that, we've got to get this back into local control because local people have a better understanding, and we're lucky enough to have your Rolls Royces and your Toyotas, and we need to build on that, and we are the best place to make those decisions going forward.
Yeah, just before I bring Rachel back, I'll act as a bit of devil's advocate, because sadly I'm starting to suspect that this is the only show in town. I think it's right that we raise concerns, it's right that we raise reservations about the lack of earlier consultation, it's right that we raised issues that both Lucy, John, Hardiel, Alison have actually raised. But just imagine in that hypothetical case we said, no thanks, we don't want it, no thanks. What's going to happen? The West Midlands will get money, we won't. They're not going to reward you for saying that. So it is a bit of a fait accompli, I believe. So from my point of view, I think we need to negotiate hard. We need to make sure and try and hold people's feet to the fire to get the best deal that we can, and it needs to be an improved deal. Because, I think we need to be realists, because if we just walk away, they're not suddenly going to say, oh, okay, all right, we'll give you a tenth of that amount, we'll give you a few £100,000, we'll give you £1 million or two, they won't. And I think we just need to be realistic about that. But that's not to be fatalistic. I think it's right and proper that we make issues about lack of consultation, not earlier consultation, make issues about where aspects of it are not right for us. And I think we say that, yeah, we're mindful of trying to get it right and to signing up, but it's got to be right. And there's improvements that need to be made. So I think all the points that you've made this evening will be actually collected and fed in, but I think we need to do more. Each and every one of us, individually and collectively, need to try to get this right for the people of Derby. And I think that's what we're charged with. Rachel, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll leave Heather to do the consultation question at the end, but I'll just do the rest of them first. That's okay, Heather? So the question was raised about the 38 million and what that is. That is equivalent of £17 per head of the population for the 2.2 million population that covers the area. It's considerably more than Greater Manchester got in the first deal they negotiated. I can't remember, it was about sort of 12, 11 pound per head. So we did very well with that, which is great. But the point we previously made, there would be continual review of those funding arrangements as part of the normal comprehensive spending review processes. In terms of the government's confidence in actually doing this, I mean, I can't possibly comment on that, Councillor Martin. I have absolutely no idea what the government is thinking to do tomorrow. But at the moment, they are committed to devolution. Devolution came about, obviously, prior to the 2010. The original ones went through in the last Labour government. It has been a direction of travel for government to have these devolution regional arrangements to try and put more powers down. So one would assume it would be, but the passage of the bill and the issues in government, I can't possibly comment. The issue about the Councillor Prosser raised about funding for the new body and new money. I mean, it is new money. It is not earmarked for the East Midlands in any of the existing funding streams that we get funding through, so it isn't in any of those existing pots. It's a new pot of money that's been... And to be fair to the civil service that we negotiated this deal with, they had to negotiate very hard with the Treasury for that money to be ripped out of the Treasury for the East Midlands. I think it pretty much is new money, as much as we can possibly confirm it. In terms of funding for the organisation, one of the other funds that isn't on the slides but is as part of the deal is £1 million per year for the East Midlands to run the combined authority. So there is funding in place to help you run it, so that the costs actually running it are not borne by taxpayers at a local level. The combined authority model across the country is different. So Greater Manchester is quite a large organisation. Some of them are very, very small organisations, very, very thin. You know, the chief executive and the vice president, and that's about it. So you can have a different model that you like and how big or small you want it to be, and how much, therefore, that brings cost alongside it. So it is a choice. At the moment, the four leaders of the four authorities are very keen on being a very thin combined authority. We get the funding, we have that collaboration, we're not creating a big organisation. That's been quite important for them. And the issue about walking away, etc. I think I would say, and being involved in the negotiations with government, and this is not fair or necessarily right, but you know, government have a perception of certain areas in the country, don't they? And there is a perception that the East Midlands can't agree on anything. That's a perception. Whether that's true or not probably is unfair, but that is a way they look at it. And I think the chief executive had a meeting recently with some civil servants from the Treasury who said, you know, really nice to come down and see you, because to us, you're just a line on a spreadsheet. And unfortunately, that is unfortunately how we are seen by, you know, Treasury officials. We are just lying on a spreadsheet. Having a combined authority, that heft you get with a regional mayor, just gives you a different reputational opportunity. And that's probably the thing about, you know, having that opportunity to keep on using it to get more. That's really the biggest prize here, I think, of all of this. But yeah, really helpful comments. Thank you, Rich.
Thank you. Just with respect to the consultation, I just wanted to make a few points, actually. The four authorities have commissioned an external specialist to undertake the consultation. So we've appointed Ipsos Mori, and we have worked with Ipsos Mori to shape the consultation, the questionnaire. You know, so in terms of Councillor Kerr's comments about it being closed, I would just say that actually there is a very open comments box where people can feedback any opinions about, you know, any aspect of the devolution deal. So certainly, you know, just to respond on that point. In terms of Councillor Dinser, we are certainly able to analyse by local authority area. Yes, so we will get that analysis. The other aspect is also by sector, so we will be able to find out, you know, in terms of the type of stakeholders. So, for example, obviously residents, businesses, voluntary and community sector. I think that will also give us a flavour. The other aspect is of course our bi-equality theme. So again, we will, you know, we will look at that analysis, which is being undertaken by Ipsos Mori, and the findings report will be presented to full council as part of the report that comes in the spring. So, thank you.
Read your comments directly to Heather and to Rachel, because they are hoping that you'll be as comprehensive as possible in your feedback and your input. Okay, thanks very much for that. Okay, moving now on to the Council Cabinet agenda. We've got a late item, I believe, that's under the excluded part, the pink papers, that's about Rolls-Royce. So starting on Item 8, approval of the council tax support scheme. Is that going to be you, Simon? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The council tax support scheme relates to the support we give to people who meet a criteria for payment of council tax. If you're a pensioner, you can claim full council tax support. If you're of working age, this policy talks about that you would normally be expected to make a contribution of up to 30%, and that's been our policy for a number of years now. There are certain other criteria taken into account, and the report is recommending no change to our policy for the forthcoming financial year 23-24. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Simon. Any comments on this particular paper? Lucy?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, two questions. Firstly, in terms of the climate implications on here, it sort of says that we don't need to think about it. It's really nice. May I say, it's really nice. This is the first time we've got these climate implication little diagrams. I think we need to work on them a bit more. But it's sort of saying it's fine. But as soon as people have more money to spend, they will spend it. And therefore, it will be spent on heating as direct climate emissions, or it'll be spent on buying more things, which also has an indirect climate effect. So we can't ignore the fact. It's absolutely the right thing to do, and I'm not criticising it, but in terms of the way in which we're doing the analysis of our climate implications, we need to be more aware of what we're doing. But on a more positive thing, are we allowed to compare those people who are eligible for council tax support with the EPC, the energy ratings for housing, so that we'll be able to target future investment in energy improvements when we get funding available? I don't know, as sort of, how easy would it be able to do that? And are we allowed to do it with GDPR considerations? Because if we can, I think it would be something that we should be very mindful of.
That's all. Can you help us, please?
Firstly, we collect data, as Councillor Kerr has indicated, for specific purposes. So it would not be right or proper to make a direct correlation between energy ratings of houses and people in receipt of council tax support, because we do not have a permission of people to use that data in that way. I think in terms of a circle, and I welcome the fact that you say that it's starting to use a common methodology for this. I think when you said it puts more money in people's pockets and they spend it, this is a policy about what people have to contribute to council tax, even if they are suffering quite strong financial hardship in their position, and the support that we can give of 70% support towards their council tax bill. So I don't think there's a link in here that says that our council tax support scheme is encouraging further sort of a spend which would link to climate emissions. This is about supporting our most vulnerable in terms of financial hardship in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. A quick one, Lucy?
Yeah, 2 points on that. Firstly, I fundamentally disagree with the point about if you give people more money, they will spend it. People who have very little money will spend it because they desperately need it. And the impact of spending it will have climate implications. So, and we should be open to that in our assessments. But the second thing is, can we include a question on the application form that would enable us, for people who tick the box and says, yes, you may compare this with our EPC rating and therefore potentially in the future target my house for energy improvements. Can we add a question that would enable us to do that onto the form that people have to fill in to apply?
Simon?
The answer to that, Councillor Kerr, is yes, if you have permission to compare data and you've made them aware and given permission to use that information in conjunction with another bit of information, that is permissible. I think we would have to consider it not just on terms of this form, but obviously as people maybe put submissions for warm home grants and everything else, would we want reciprocal? So Ian Fullinger's here, so himself and John Massey will take this away as an item to discuss of whether there's an opportunity there. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. I do feel compelled, actually, to just make the point in response to Councillor Kerr's point that people given some sort of council tax support will just go off and spend it. I think, you know, clearly no one in this council chamber would think anybody should get any council tax support if they could just go off and spend it. The reason they are in receipt of the support is because lots of calculations done over many years by all sorts of bodies suggest that actually these people don't have the money in the first place to pay their council tax. And I just think it's important to make that point, because this council is a caring council, and we do not assume that people in support of council tax support are somehow profligate and heating up the planet. They're probably the kind of people who are contributing the very least to climate change emissions. Thank you.
Despite
Is this about item 9? So we moved on.
it's about the recommendation, Chair, as we've just been talking about.
Recommendation with regard to item 8.
Yes, the officer has just commented.
If you can come in, you know, because often this does happen where we move on and then you put your hand up, Lucy. So this is still about item 8.
This is item 8, Chair, yes. This is, just to emphasise, I think we should have a recommendation to Cabinet to be open and pushing forward, pushing at that open door to look at adding in questions about enabling people who are applying for money to be included, to be cross-referenced against EPC ratings for potential future funding, and to ensure that that is considered slightly more formally than I'll go and have a conversation with the relevant officer.
Somebody was... Do you want to come in, Nicola?
So I appreciate what you're trying to do, Councillor Kerr, I really do. I get what you're trying to say. But, for example, my EPC rating was done when I moved in my house 7 years ago, and things have changed since that EPC rating was carried out. Ultimately, if I was to apply for that grant, you're going to be based on a house that didn't have a new boiler, didn't have new windows, because that was the last EPC rating that I had within my property. I think I get what you're trying to do, and I understand trying to get a correlation and understanding of what implications we're having as a council on climate change. But I have to say we have to think about this more realistically. What it says within the climate change element of here is what we as a council can have achieved as climate savings, i.e. we are doing this through online rather than paper forms, etc., etc. Externally, we can't control everything, and whether people choose to pay off debts or pay individual items or purchase more food in the cupboards, with all due respect, it's none of our business.
Do we have a seconder for that recommendation? I don't think we do. Okay. Those in favour, please show. Those against, please show. That's lost, I'm afraid. Moving on to item 9, and I think we want to take this in combination with item 14 as well, Gamal. Do you want to lead on this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So the item 9 is around consultation on the future viability of Ashgate Nursery School. Chair, if I draw out headlines within the report, Ashgate Nursery School is in the city centre, as is Central Nursery School, so either side of Friargate. Numbers have been falling over the last few years for a number of factors, both in relation to COVID and in relation to changing in families' work-life pattern in terms of the extended offer and additional hours that families and parents used to purchase. The other aspect is around Central Nursery School, a very good school providing special needs provision, but that formula approach is now more consistent with other schools as well. The combination of those factors, like falling numbers and the ones that I've outlined, have also resulted in a significant financial deficit across both of those schools. So, Chair, there's a number of factors at play here. So Ashgate Nursery School has a financial deficit of around 134,000, and Central Nursery School's predicted deficit is in the region of 311,000, a combined deficit of about 446,000. What this is proposed in the report is to consult on consolidating and closing Ashgate Nursery School, and those pupils can be accommodated within the nearby Central Nursery School, which is a larger site. And Chair, the recommendations in the report are to approve the consultation document attached as Appendix 1 to consider the future viability of Ashgate Nursery School, and the consultation period will run from 9th of January to 27th of January, and the outcome will be reported to Council Cabinet for consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Gamal. Can you help us, before I bring members in terms of this deficit? You say 134,000 deficit for Ashgate alone, and a combined deficit of 446,000.
Yes, Chair, that's right.
Is that increasing each year?
Yes, Chair, that has been over the last sort of 3 or 4 years. We as council officers and the governing body have been working very closely over the last 6 months or so to try and find a way forward in relation to closing that deficit, but it is an accumulative deficit over a number of years.
So you're suggesting that that figure is almost 500,000, that is going to be increase if nothing's done?
That's right, Chair.
Can you just help members of this committee, so we, in basic terms, how that deficit has arisen?
It's a number of factors, Chair. Sorry, it's not one as I've outlined. One of those is to do with changes to the way special needs funding worked, but the report does outline that there are only 3 children with education and healthcare plans, and trying to move towards more an equal fitting, which is similar to all nursery schools. And secondly, Chair, it's also to do with falling birth rate and nursery children and take-up of early years childcare. So it's kind of 3 or 4 things at play, which fundamentally, year on year, over the last 4 years, have resulted to where we are and will continue to increase. And that's why the decision being taken to consider the consultation.
These two are combined. Will there continue to be a deficit? Are you hoping to get rid of that deficit completely, or?
I don't think it will disappear immediately, Chair. I think that work will then start in relation to what does a single viable central nursery look like, and what does that mean in terms of sort of cost and get the budget back into balance. Chair, until that detail work is done, it feels it would be over a 1, 2, 3 year period, as licence deficits tend to work within schools.
Okay, thank you very much. John Whitby, first of all. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Gamal, I'm just concerned that the reasons behind this the shortfall, COVID, etc., and people working from home, presumably this would apply to every nursery school in Derby. And are we sort of going to see the same thing crop up in 6 months' time in another nursery, or a year's time in another nursery? It can't be just unique to Ashgate and Central, surely.
No, Chair. I think, it is a concern around sort of other nursery schools, but the other nursery schools offer different models as well. You know, Central and Ashgate do offer wraparound care, which is really good, but it is predicated on income coming through. Other nursery schools may offer a different type of kind of provision. But Chair, just to clarify, the viability and the pupil numbers in other maintained nursery schools, they remain viable. It's a number of factors that have been at play here. So at this stage, there is no proposal to have a sweeping move around or any concerns around viability of other nursery schools there.
Is that despite the financial case?
No, Chair, that's primarily based on the number of pupils that are within those nursery schools, and they remain viable and financially viable. There is a sufficient need for those places in those particular areas where those standalone nursery schools are located.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, I'm councillor for Darley Ward, which includes Central Nursery, and obviously we're also the sister ward of Macbeth Ward, which has Ashgate Nursery in it. I think it's worth remembering why these nurseries opened. I mean, Central, I know more about. I know it's opened around 120 years ago. And this was to serve poor children in the city or deprived children. There is a mixed intake at Central. I think it's probably less mixed at Ashgate, I imagine. And the report, it says that Ashgate is in an area of significant socio-economic disadvantage. These nurseries cannot be modelled on the kind of daycare nursery provision that you get in abundance, actually, in that area of the city. These are places of education for young children, and they really do offer more educationally and socially than many of the private nurseries. They're also very much needed. And it really concerns me that this is an act of short-termism. I understand we're talking about a consultation, so fair enough, at this stage. But basically, this idea that numbers have gone down, I mean, it's about 85% in the report, it said, which I admit is a reasonable drop. But, you know, we've had lots of things. John and I have discussed bus services closing along Ashbourne Road because of COVID. And we're arguing in relation to that, come on, you know, long term, the numbers will increase. This idea that you just close a service now because it's losing, 140,000, I think is too short term. And it fills me with horror, really, to think that only last year we were criticising the Cabinet for spending yet another £140,000 on a consultation for the assembly rooms, on top of some figure of around 200,000 that had already been relatively recently allocated to that. And here we are saying, oh no, these schools are in deficit, let's close Ashgate. Of course there has to be a viable model. We all understand that. But we have to understand that these are not daycare nurseries. And I absolutely predict that when this closes, within a few years, we'll be saying, oh, if only we had some specialist provision in these areas for children whose educational outcomes are far below where they should be, for children who not always, not through any fault of anybody, aren't getting the social and educational support that they might otherwise have at home. That's why the nurseries exist in the first place. So I'm a little bit despairing, to be honest, about this. I think that so often we've got Pauline here, and Pauline, I don't want to bring Pauline in, it's probably not her area, but she knows about this, about the fact that we've had to have an education priority area in this city in recent years, and we've been concerned about funding for that going out the window. We have to get these children early. And it's not just about the education of the children, it's also about support for the parents. Parents across the social spectrum need support when you're stuck at home with young kids a lot. Anybody can need support in that case. These schools are in areas of socio-economic disadvantage, and they are very, very important to the social fabric of those areas. And so I want to ask, really, and I understand you say you've been working with the governors, but I want to know, have you really done everything you can to seek the funding, to seek the budget options, to seek the model, the different modelling that might be in place to keep Ashgate Nursery open? Thank you.
Yes, Chair, absolutely. So, as I say, very detailed conversations, and just for information, over 10 different scenarios were developed jointly in relation to developing a viable option for the school, and very detailed work, fortnightly meetings with the governing bodies and the council and senior leaders from the council across a number of teams in order to reach the point. And sadly, we weren't able to come to a viable option on that. Chair, very briefly, it's always very, very regrettable, of course, as a council, when we have to consult on the viability of schools. And this is, of course, the launch of that consultation, and we really welcome the views that come forward during that consultation. And Chair, just for information, in terms of nursery schools, the standalone council nursery schools, there is additional around 100,000 plus protection built into nursery schools, which isn't built into PVI sector, in order to try and ensure viability. But in this case, there are a number of deep-rooted factors at play, so it's trying to secure the viability so we can keep as many nursery schools as open as possible. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. In terms of the consultation paper, I feel that there are two things missing from it that would be helpful, and I'd like to know why they've not been included. One is an equivalent table for the number of younger children who have been going to central nursery recently, so that you've got the whole picture of the both establishments. And the second thing is to know what the numbers of potential children to go into those establishments is. So within the areas that they are primarily serving, how many 1-year-olds, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds do we actually have who might be starting in the next year? And I think that trend, if we've got a scenario there where the number of young people in the area is falling, we should be able to see that over a period of time. If we have had a graph of the last 10 years of young people, then we could see that there was a problem. But if the number of young people aren't falling, then they should be accessing our provision, you would hope, because our provision is so good and wraparound and education orientated and so on. So in that case, I'm asking, how have we actually been promoting the services that we're offering against those private sector services which may be promoting themselves more effectively because we don't think we need to? And that might be a comment for other nursery schools across the city to be thinking about as well.
Gamal, how have we been promoting and trying to drum up more interest, support and patronage?
Yeah, Chair, just to clarify, for both Ashgate and Nursery, the governing bodies have been doing an excellent job in terms of promoting the schools. The council has been working closely with them in terms of additional 2-year-old provision in addition to the normal 15-hour offer. In addition to that, both nursery schools have been offering wraparound care over and above for 3- and 4-year-olds as well, which is outlined there. And the birth data across the city is falling. That's impacting on primary schools, and that is continuing to... That's right, Chair. And therefore, there is a number of primary schools who have higher levels of surplus. We've gone through that peak of high numbers in primary in 2010, 2011, 2012. Downward trajectory. Secondaries are going up as you phase through into that. So it's a combination factor in terms of falling birth rate, the population in that area, a lower number of children in that age group of 2, 3 and 4, Chair.
I actually have a recommendation, Chair, so I don't know if you want to take Lucy's first, but I'm easy.
It's just the 2 points that I think that the points that Gamal has given us about the falling birth rate in the city, I think that is a really important point to put into the consultation paper that we've got a draft of here. And he didn't comment on why we're not including the actual numbers at Central in that consultation as well, both of which I think would be useful. And in terms of promotion, it isn't just having a really good offer, which we've been told about, it's actually putting leaflets through the relevant doors or having them sitting in doctors' surgeries and that sort of thing. It's actually promotion of what's going on. So I don't know whether we've actually done the promotion.
Chair, just clarifying, the governing body's responsibility is to do that, which they have been actively doing that in terms of promoting in the wider vicinity around wraparound care and that promotion. And they've been actively doing that over the last 2, 3, 4 years, if not longer. Absolutely, absolutely. The governing body, both because it's a shared governing body, shared head teacher, and they have been absolutely promoting that school over the last 3, 4, 5 years in terms of, and that's demonstrated by the additional wraparound offer that's there. And Chair, in terms of the consultation document, it does set out in terms of Central Nursery School is a 52-place nursery school, Ashgate Nursery School is a 40-place nursery school, and the tables kind of set out where numbers are, but numbers vary term by term because of the intake.
We've obviously heard, Gamal, the reasons behind this, but you're obviously picking up from fellow councillors, myself, because I represent Darley Ward, Central Nursery, and obviously John's here representing Mackworth. But I think all of us are concerned when we see places like this lost. So there is genuine concern that we do need real reassurance that no stones have been unturned to try to save this. So we have a recommendation. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. I do appreciate some of the points that have been made, and I do agree with some of the points made by Councillor Kerr, it's worth noting on this occasion. But I do think, I think, to be honest, if we had been sitting here as I have been for the last 18 months or so and not hearing about the hundreds of thousands that are put into all sorts of projects in the city, and particularly spent on consultants, etc., I might be a bit more forgiving of the council's financial position in relation to these nurseries. But I think that, there are factors like falling birth rates, but I think that I don't think it's as simple as that, because birth rates fluctuate, as I say. And what I see in this is short-term, and I agree with what you just said, Chair. So I appreciate that much has been done, but I think more can and should be done, even during the period of the consultation, and especially afterwards. So my recommendation is this, is given the importance of nursery education to children's educational and social outcomes, especially in areas of significant socio-economic disadvantage, Exec Scrutiny recommends that Cabinet seeks funding and budgetary solutions to keep Ashgate Nursery open and to build on its potential for the future. Thank you.
Chair, I just think it's important to remember this is just actually to go to consultation. It's not to close the nursery. It's to go to consultation to hear the public's view. I appreciate and I may agree or disagree with what you're saying, but ultimately now is not the time to put that recommendation in. We should go to consultation and hear what the public and the users think before we make any recommendations to the Cabinet about spending money that ultimately may not be needed because people aren't interested.
A recommendation on the table. We've heard both councillors put slightly different points of view. Do you have a seconder to the recommendation? John, a second recommendation. So I'll take it to the vote. Those in favour, please show. With that recommendation. Those against, please show. Unfortunately, that's lost. Yeah, okay. All right, item 14. Sorry, Lucy?
Chair, I have a recommendation.
Lucy, as I'll ask, but please indicate before we move on to the next item, well before, right. Is this about item 9?
This is about Ashgate, Chair.
Right, not after the event, because next time I will just move on. All right, thank you. Okay.
So I have a recommendation that Cabinet include a table of recent pupil numbers for Central Nursery in a similar manner to Ashgate, and also that the context of birth rates have been falling across the city are included in the consultation document.
I personally would be willing to support that, but only if you would accept the amendment that concerns have been raised by this committee about the possible proposed closure of Ashgate.
Chair, I don't think you can link the two like that. I think it is not. I think it is not appropriate.
Those in favour, please show Lucy's recommendation. Those against, please show. Okay. Now, before we move on, is there anything else that you want to do? Come on, just one thing before you go. No, that's it.
Thank you, Chair. This is a short item. This is an item in relation to the Council's approved children's residential accommodation strategy for looked after children. The Council has now procured an experienced provider to work in partnership with the Council to create small children's homes for solo placements. A young person has been identified, and this report sets out that as part of that mobilisation process, the proposal is to refurbish one home, a small home that's been identified. Likely cost of that refurbishment at the moment is around £60,000 from the current approved £1 million capital funding for children's homes. And Chair, the provider is currently completing a feasibility, and once that's been completed, a decision will be taken as to whether it's sensible to award £60,000 for the provider to undertake necessary work and to have the small home registered in readiness for March with Ofsted to place the young person. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Gamal. Any points for item 14? Lucy?
Again, this is something which the climate change issue is what I was going to pick up on. I really support this as an initiative, but it would be nice to have had a comment about what we were encouraging another organisation to be very energy efficient thinking in their refurbishment of the building, and to have had that as a specific point.
Thank you. Gamal? Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have the detail here. I think there is information included in the tender documentation in terms of once a refurbishment and what sort of energy rating we would expect within that particular home in terms of boilers and replacements. And from memory, I think that was a rating of C, but don't quote me on that. But that was factored in order to try and do necessary work with sustainability in the forefront and climate change. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Gamal. Anybody else on this? Yep. Councillor Jennings.
Sorry, just Chair, I know for a fact that Derby Home's minimum EPC rating for any property of theirs is C.
Any more comments?
Thank you, Chair. Members will be well aware that the Council has an absolute obligation to make the best use of its housing stock, and currently we are under tremendous pressure in terms of the demand for that stock, and that's combined at the current time with really low turnover, almost unprecedented low levels of turnover within our stock. That's particularly acute in relation to 4-bed and larger properties that the Council owns, and those properties that have been significantly adapted to facilitate people with disabilities. Indeed, as the report highlights, just 1.5% of our stock is currently 4-bed or larger, and we have something in the order of 300 people on our waiting list waiting for 4-bed or larger properties. So the waits that those people have to get a larger property or a significantly adapted property are very significant and are the longest waiting times that we have for our stock. We do have a number of initiatives to try and increase our stock of both of those types of properties in terms of building and buying that type of property, and encouraging housing association partners to build and buy that type also. But ultimately, whilst we have a home release incentive package which encourages people who are under occupying houses or no longer need a home that is significantly adapted, ultimately, if those tenants decide not to move, despite our encouragement, currently we are unable to move them out of those homes, and that home is a largely wasted resource given the pressures on our waiting list. This proposal, Chair, proposes that we introduce flexible or fixed-term tenancies for new tenants starting from April next year, who are entering either 4-bed or larger homes or significantly adapted properties, The paper proposes that those tenants would be given a 5-year tenancy that would be reviewed at the end of those 5 years. If the tenant retains the need for that particular type of property, the tenancy would be rolled on for another 5 years, and so on and so on. If and when a tenant or a household no longer needed that property, we would work with them over a significant period of time to find a suitable alternative property that is better suited to the size or the needs of their household. Chair, we've been out and done a 3-month consultation on this proposal. 86% of the people who responded to that consultation agreed in relation to a fixed term tenancy for 4-bed properties, and 80% agreed for a fixed term tenancy for adapted properties, Chair. And if I could just add one thing, Chair, I think when I looked through this report in preparation for the meeting, I thought we'd probably been a little bit harsh on ourselves in terms of the climate change implications, because I do think if we are putting the right sized household into the right sized property, actually there is a climate change benefit to us, Chair. And I apologise, the current climate change return suggests this policy is neutral. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Any comments, please? Alison, and then Lucy, I think, wishes to speak. Yeah, Alison, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the committee and bearing with me on hearing me speak again. But I feel compelled to speak because we're getting a lot of issues that are very close to my heart today. It's quite right that often people end up in a home that's rather large for them, and they may want to move into a smaller home, and that is good, that is fine. Let's hope they can be helped in doing that by Derby Homes. But I think it's the hypocrisy that I find totally appalling, to be honest, between private accommodation and council accommodation. So council accommodation, it's a bit like, are they rabbit hutches for the amount of rabbits you put in them? These places are homes. Somebody's lived there for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years even. And for all sorts of reasons, they feel they can't move. Maybe their children live nearby, they're too elderly to fit into another area, they're anxious, whatever that be. They had a large family and they regularly come and visit them, and they need all the bedrooms. So I think that they're people's homes. They're where people live. And of course we need more 4-bedroom homes. But I don't think the answer to that is to start kicking out people who are given a 4-bedroom home because, suddenly they don't quite meet the criteria. We saw the cruelty of the bedroom tax and the impact that's had. And the answer is to build more 4-bedroom homes, Ian. And I know Derby Homes are trying to do that, but and they're not succeeding as well as they would like to. But that is where I believe the energy should be put. So I'm not in favour of fixed-term tenancies because I think it makes people feel very insecure in their homes. And one of the reasons you'll have low turnovers because these people have a home and they have nowhere else to go. They're not looking around at a private housing market, hope they can move and make a killing on their next house move. It's somewhere for them to live. So I'm very opposed to the idea of fixed-term tenancies. And I challenge anybody sitting in this room who has a mother living in a 3- or 4-bedroom house that might be privately owned, just asking yourselves, well, would they like some authority to come round suggesting to that widow or that elderly lady that she should no longer be living in that house because somehow or other she's taking rooms that other people should have? Thank you.
I think I understand some of the points that you've raised there, and I do appreciate that these are people's homes for a period of time. But I would totally disagree with you in terms of if we're talking about a privately owned home, to me that's a very different aspect to somebody that is renting, effectively renting a property from, whether that's an authority or a private rented company. Ultimately, we know that there are people out there that are in desperate need of these houses, that are in very different situations to those that people that may have been in a house, a 4-bedroomed house, in circumstances where they had young children, potentially weren't working and they needed that support. Absolutely agree with all of that. It's fantastic that we're able to do that with the right people. The issue that we've got now is we don't have the housing stock. Whether you agree or disagree with the right to buy scheme, I think that put a lot of pressure on councils across the country because we don't have the housing stock that we had back then, where there was that movement within there. I personally think this is a really sensible idea. We're not saying we're kicking them out. It's effectively saying we will work with them to look at other opportunities. I think there's an element in there of trying to offer opportunities and properties within that local area to support them living in areas of thing. But ultimately, you know, we do kind of contradict ourselves here, because if my grandma was living in a 4-bedroomed house, then I would be saying to her, that's a lot of bills to pay, that's a lot of council tax to pay, that's a lot of issues that you don't need, you need a smaller property. And that's a choice that a person who is a private rented owner can have. And why should that choice and that opportunity not be given to public or private rented individuals? I think ultimately, if 86% of the people challenged here, I think there will be just as many people in agreement with myself, potentially, you know, so I wouldn't challenge anybody to disagree or agree with me. I think we're all entitled to our own opinions.
Thank you for the introduction, because it answered one of my questions, which was how do the follow-on tenancies work? But it also worries me, because to have an initial tenancy for 5 years and then to have another one for 5 years, it means that towards the end of every 5-year period, you are on tenterhooks and you don't know what's happening. But you also may know that you have the situation is known to be changing. So that if, for example, the young people in that household are now in their late teens and early 20s, it may be easier to anticipate that at least one of them is likely to have left fairly soon, and therefore it wouldn't be right to be waiting another 5 years before you have that conversation again. So I think that process needs a little bit more refining. I would think that it would be much more comfortable to be in a sort of a 2-year, initial 5-year, and then a 2-year rolling system, so that you knew you were going to be there for another 2 years, which would also give time to manage a change and for another property in that locality or in a more appropriate locality to become available in that time frame, and for this property, the property that is needed, to become vacated in a more timely manner. So I just encourage officers to have a little bit more thought about how that would actually work. I have also a question about what happens for somebody who has an existing tenancy, but who then has some extensive disability adaptations made to the property, and it would therefore now fall into an adapted property category. Does their tenancy change, or do they still have the initial tenancy? And which is what I would hope, because otherwise I don't think it feels very fair. But there might be other factors that come into play in that scenario. And the final point is it's a bigger question, and it's that question about, here is somebody in a property that they don't want to leave, but they have extra capacity in that house. Would somebody in that situation be, if appropriate, be able to take into that household somebody from the, for example, shared life scheme, and be actually occupying additional bedrooms, providing a service that we actually need, or becoming a foster carer, or one of these other factors? And are those opportunities being put to people when appropriate?
Thank you, Chair. We do appreciate this is quite a dilemma, and some of the issues are quite finely balanced. However, on balance, the report concludes that the fact that there are some households who are out there in completely overcrowded conditions because of the lack of the right size stock, or other households with no adaptations currently in place because of the shortage of adaptive properties, facing a very long delay. On balance, that this is the recommendation we should go with. In relation to Councillor Kerr's specific points, if someone has an existing tenancy and then they require significant adaptations, we are not proposing that they would fall within this scheme. They have an existing tenancy that will be protected. And I think Councillor Kerr made the point, again, in terms of tenancy rights, if a tenant was to have one of these fixed term tenancies, and then either at 5 or 10 years they moved into a smaller right-sized tenancy, they would retain all of their right to buy credits, if you like, that they've built up. So those 5 years or 10 years wouldn't be lost in terms of their rights, in terms of right to buy the next property they moved into, Chair. And sorry, I can see Councillor Kerr shaking her head, so maybe if I misheard that point.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I appreciate the need for this, I'm afraid, given such limited housing stock. And if people are going into the tenancy on that basis, knowing what is going to come, I suppose, you know, it won't be a surprise further down the line. To me, it's just about the devil in the detail and the support they're given when they move, when they downsize. Are they going to be given enough time, first of all, enough priority, you know, in terms of finding an appropriate accommodation in the locality, etc. It's the time factor for me. Thank you.
Yeah, we think, Chair, in a lot of cases, we'll be working with that household for up to a year, Chair, to make sure that they do get the right property in the right location and they're not going to lose their local connections. So we recognise that, Chair, that it's really important that we work with them to get the right property for them. Absolutely, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I think most of the points have already been raised tonight, but I just think that what we need to realise that we did go out to consultation about this, and over 80% of people agreed with the policy. There are obvious pitfalls, such as the 5-year tenancy. But I know that people that sign a 5-year tenancy know they're there for 5 years and not there for life. And I think they accept that when they sign that. And I think everything flows from that, really. So, thank you.
Yeah, so the government in this country is moving away from landlords being able to evict tenants through no fault, so no fault evictions at the end of terms, for instance. So in Scotland, you can't just say to a tenant, right, your time's up, I need my house back. You can no longer do that. In Wales, they've extended it. I think it's down to 6 months now. I know from my understanding, the English government is also looking at removing the ability of landlords to remove tenants at the end of terms. So there is, in my eyes, potentially a risk where this might actually be outlawed before we even bring it in. Is this something that's been considered?
Councillor is quite correct that the government is certainly considering this area. I don't believe that fixed term or flexible tenancies will be outlawed, Chair, but clearly if they were, then at that point in time we would have to stop them, clearly.
Right, I'm on, sorry. The proposals outlined in this report are to progress phase 1A of the capital ambition to expand places for special educational needs in Derby. And so Following the original consultation and a wide-ranging feasibility for St Clair's, we are now able to present the proposal for St Clair's to be expanded and improved. As St Clair's will create, adding to the numbers in St Clair's will create an additional 35 placements, but more as importantly, that the current provision, which is a secondary special school, is modernised for learners and create real improvement for the curriculum and for the learners, which will be 180 Derby learners with special educational needs. So the proposal is that just over £6 million, as outlined there, is now being up to sorry, apologies, I'm just scrolling down in a complicated 6.187400 of capital funding to develop the St Clair's School project, and that is what we're coming for here today. Also, we are working very closely to expand further placements in Derby, and essentially to keep children in the city, close to their families, close to their friends and their communities, and also, where possible, not to be travelling outside the city, going to out of area and sometimes extremely high cost placements with additional travel costs as well. So the proposal is that we would also create special additional capacity in hubs within mainstream schools, which is a new model we're looking at, have adopted from Shropshire, which is working extremely well, where a special school actually teaches and runs a special school class, but in a mainstream school. And so we are seeking approval to delegate approvals to the strategic director of People Services and the lead member to approve those additional SEND capital programmes up to a value of 0.25 million, subject to negotiation of acceptable terms. And we think those hubs are a really exciting way of maximising existing space in schools and ensuring that more of our young people with special needs are actually able to have a social life and mix within a mainstream setting, but at the same time get specialist provision. Thank you.
Chair, I very much welcome this. St Clair's is one of the schools in Littleover Ward, and it's got a really nice location, and I think it's going to be. I hope that it becomes an even better school than it is now. My just question is, again, I'm going to come back to our new green credentials here, where we've got a +7 for buildings and a +2 for energy. So I'm hoping that means that the buildings are going to be refurbished and become really energy efficient, and the +2 means that there are going to be PVs going onto its roof. There's no mention of that in the report, which would have been nice, Chair, if it had been.
Thank you. No more contributions. Thank you for fully moving on to
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I think every councillor in this room understands the Thank you. I think every councillor in this room understands the challenges that the public sector finances are facing nationally and locally as a result of the macroeconomic conditions, so inflation, utility costs, raw materials, supply chains, and also the increasing demand that is coming from a cost of living crisis as more and more people are quite rightly presenting to the council to request service. And we're seeing that in terms of homelessness presentations, we're seeing it in respect of free school meal eligibility, and we're seeing that in our front door for both children and adult social care. So this is trying to set the context of what our budget, which will be issued next week, is having to respond to in terms of an economic shock that has brought pressures into the financial management of the council. This is reflected in the forecast overspend in 2022-2023 and an ongoing impact into the future years. So what do I want to bring out from this report? Well, firstly, it is just trying to highlight the increasing demand and cost of services, and that's in paragraph 4.4.1. You can see a graph there of the impact on the various items, new pressures, which are things like homeschool transports, children's social care, adult social care, pay inflation, and price inflation. And that means that the potential budget gap for the council before any new funding or any savings was in the region of £31 million. £31 million, just to put in context, is the aggregate of the 4-year savings that we would have that we've delivered over the past 4 years. So the Chancellor on the 17th of November published the autumn statement, and that indicated a series of announcements, some which relate to local government and especially to social care. The key announcements that he highlighted was that councils will have the flexibility to increase council tax with a new set of council tax referendum criteria. So that gives the potential for a 1% increase in general council tax and a 1% increase in adult social care precept over and above what we had forecast. That would generate just over £2 million. He also announced 2 sets of adult social care announcements, one being some new money for adult social care or social care recognising the pressures that we're facing, including hospital discharge and also core funding for ourselves. And he also delayed a delay in the implementation of adult social care reforms, but allowed that money to be retained within local authority, which was welcome. But the sum of those 2 amounts, the new money and the council tax flexibilities, generate just over £10 million. So if you remember just earlier, I talked about there being an estimated budget gap. This is a table on 4.4.2 of £31 million, and the announcements generate just over 10 million, which takes the revised budget gap for next year down to 21,092,000. So we've had to respond to that in a proactive way, looking at our service provision, looking at our service prioritisation and the potential for service reviews. And probably the approach we've taken is highlighted in paragraph 4.4.7, which talks about the themes that we've been reviewing the budget: cash freezes, vacancy management, only progressing essential capital programme, looking at our income collection approaches, delivering our Working Smarter and Better Together programmes, asset rationalisation, looking at how our services are delivered in their operating models, and obviously maximising the strengths-based approach within the community where possible. So the report highlights that is where we've provided a focus to try and bridge the gap, and also the importance of service reviews going forward over the next 3 years to try and find further areas for improvement, efficiency, effectiveness, and economy. So just really, this is setting the scene for the challenge that the council had to respond to. It is very tough. I was just reading earlier today, Leeds City Council are looking at a 79 million gap for next year in their budget, and again, all the council stories are indicating multi-million, and in many cases a lot more than Derby is experiencing. But it does mean that in responding to this budget, setting a balanced budget is going to be a budget which requires tough decisions and requires us to look right across the council. And that's a cabinet report that will be considered on the 21st of July. Just to indicate, we do not have the of December. Thank you, Lucy, for correcting that. And we do not have the local government finance settlement that is talked about by coming out on either the 20th or the 21st of December, i.e. the day that we issue and consider the cabinet proposals for balancing a budget. That will be for a balanced budget based on the information that we have. So hopefully this is a scene setter. Hopefully it shows the magnitude of the task, and you will receive a report which says how the administration are proposing to bridge that, and that will be form the basis of consultation between the cabinet meeting then and the end of January. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Yeah, I have a recommendation to actually make. It is a dire situation, but I think it's building on us to actually raise these concerns, and hopefully they will be shared across all parties. I'm open, within reason, to certain amounts of amendments, but I'm thinking along the lines of executive scrutiny recommends Cabinet immediately raises our concerns with government that the projection for finances, services and jobs in this city, like many throughout the country, are dire. And without immediate help and input, we could fail in our responsibility in the next few years to provide vital services in this city, just like many others. And so that's the one I think we ought to, in terms of just getting the debate, I think both with Cabinet, with government, and I think indeed the wider public. They need to be aware of what is happening to us, and I don't think they ought to be left to the last minute. So that's what I'm thinking of.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt Simon Riley paints a very bleak picture, and it's reflected not just here in this, as you mentioned, in Derby City, but right across the country. Councils that you would normally not expect to be putting representations to government have done so, and I think we do need to find a way of communicating our concerns, and the fact that we're waiting until the end of December to find out what sort of assumptions we're making will be met or not. It does mean 5% more taxation on top of all the difficulties that our residents already are facing with the cost of living, and that's the only solution that's available. And we need to continue to ask for more funding to stop this decimation, I think, in terms of, despite the best efforts of officers in terms of trying to get to the 90% savings, it'll be hard decisions having to be made, difficult decisions having to be made. So I think we do need to communicate this, and I hope that the Cabinet will join us in terms of the recommendation. I'm happy to second the recommendation you made.
Thank you, Councillor Dinser, for your contribution. Any more contributions? Lucy?
Yeah, I'm happy to support your recommendation, Chair. I have two questions though. I wanted a bit more clarity in 4.3.4. There's a comment that would say we're going to be reducing the borrowing requirement. I just wanted a bit more about how we are intending to do that. And then in 4.4.7, where we have the graphic about how the steps we're going to go through to try and have a really creative look at how we are providing services and so on. In step 7, where we have implement a new operating model, I think we need to be very open to seeing how we can be working much more closely with the public, with the community, and encouraging the self-reliance and community actions that we talked about so much when we were in the COVID lockdown situation. And we need to be really looking at how we can share with the public the situation that we're in so that they can actually help us reduce some of the worst impact.
Thank you, Chair. I think we all appreciate how diabolical the situation is at the moment. There's no hiding away from the situation. But ultimately, I do think the officers have done a fantastic job over the last few years to put us in a position we could have been in a far worse position. There's been some fantastic opportunities taken to work on this working smarter element. I'm not saying we're perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I do think that we could be in a far worse position than we are in, than like others across the country are at the moment. But I have to agree that there's the government, for me, it's time to step in and help, because ultimately we as a city cannot continue in the way that we are. And I appreciate that there's going to be challenges from the current issues that we've faced as a council, but ultimately that comes from a long line of issues that we've all had to deal with together. And I think this is the time to bring Derby together and to work together for better solutions, because ultimately we are, you know, it's not going to be an easy game to play for the next 5 to 10 years, in my view.
Thank you. I think so far we had a lot of positive contributions to unite behind this call to government. Alison.
Thank you, Chair. Just, you know, obviously a word of caution. The government itself is not minded to engage in excessive public expenditure. That's been very clear as an agenda from the Conservatives for the last 12 years. On top of which, they've just single-handedly, in the last few months, wiped millions of pounds out of the British economy, therefore the British government coffers, by absolutely kamikaze policies, economic policies, and it's the same government in place now, just a different personnel that has actually done that. On top of which, of course, we've had the disastrous, economically disastrous expedition of Brexit, which we are still in, which has also weakened this country and made it much poorer. So going to government with a begging bowl is something which the council has to do, and that is something to which the officers are not, it's not their fault. However, I do think we mustn't have particularly high expectations of this particular government. I also believe that whilst I know from my own experience that running the council finances is very difficult, and there have been a shortage of money since the Conservatives came to office 12 years ago, I also know that since the Conservatives came into control in 2018, the council's reserves have been called upon time and time again, despite warnings from Labour, in order to prop up budgets that have refused to take really hard decisions. And therefore, you know, we are in a parlous state, but it needn't have been this bad. And certainly, given the Conservative government's choices in recent years, and particularly in recent months, it's not going to be easy to get out of this state. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to put the recommendation now, if that's okay. Nicola? Just
to sort of come back a little bit on that situation. I don't think at any one point any of us in 2018, whenever it was, could have predicted a pandemic. And actually, as a city, I think we did an amazing job of working together. We talked about the community aspects. Lucy mentioned about the things that have been come into play and how that has supported the council and go forward. You know, there has been an unprecedented amount of different things thrown at us, and I still think the officers and the council cabinet have done an excellent job.
Thank you, Nicola. Right, the recommendation is thus. Executive Scrutiny recommends Cabinet immediately raises the concerns with government that the projection for our finances, services and jobs in this city, like many throughout the country, are dire. And without immediate help and input, we could fail in our responsibility to provide vital services over the next few years. Okay, seconder for that. Hardy, will you second that? Could I have those in favour, please?
I assume, Chair, that the questions that were asked in the previous report, you didn't want any follow-up of those. If any of the members want answers to the questions raised, I'm happy to give them outside of this meeting. Because there were a series of queries raised, Chair, but you moved to the recommendation. Thank you. So this report is the Treasury Management mid-year report. So just a bit of recollection for you. This is a reserve matter to full council. So you set the Treasury Management strategy every February, and then you are required to receive a mid-year report. This report comes to you as scrutiny. It comes to the Audit Committee, and it also is received at full council. If you just again reflect on some of the situations that we are reading in the press about Thurrock and their treasury management practices, Croydon, Slough, just to name a few, then the importance of knowing that our investments and borrowing have at the core of it security, balancing risk and then return is really important. I would encourage you to maybe watch the end of the Audit Committee from last week where Councillor Jennings chaired. It basically gave me the opportunity to work through with the Audit Committee for about 20 minutes the contents of this Treasury Management report. So rather than repeating it here, I'd recommend that you do watch that. But fundamentally, this report says that we have balanced and continue to balance those three principles of security first, taking a relatively low risk approach to returns, and also making sure that we have sufficient liquidity to manage the council's activity day by day. It does talk about that the return on our investments, because of increase in investment rates, is going up, and it also talks that we are historically under borrowed, so we've used internal investments to negate more expensive borrowing. That has obviously benefited the council over many years, including the last 4 or 5 when we've had some more significant capital expenditure meeting the ambition of the city. So I'm happy to take questions on here, but I think I would encourage this committee not just to nod it through, because it is important that you understand and scrutinise this as an important part of the governance and financial management of the authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Comments and observations, please. Lucy, thank you.
I was on at the Audit Committee meeting last week when we had this, and we did have it was a useful overview as to what's in the report, which gave it more context. And I think sometimes a verbal presentation can be less dry than reading a report like this. One of the things that I had pulled up and I thought we might have had as a late paper to this meeting was a bit more clarity about Table 7, and maybe we will have that in future, because this is one of the most complicated bits of the thing. But I think it's right for us to be cautious in the way we are investing when our resources are limited, which they very much are at the moment, Chair. It can be tempting to think that you could win the lottery by investing something in a wilder manner, but I don't think that the lottery is won very often by many people. So I think this is the right process that we are following through.
Thank you, Lucy. Hardiel.
Yeah, I mean, with Harvey, myself, we were both on and Lucy, we were on the Audit and Governance Committee where we discussed this and the background context. So based on that discussion and the efforts of the officers to make sure that our treasury management is as effective as possible without being over reckless, and that's really not a bad position to be, particularly in the current climate where we are. So I'm happy to support this particular report. Thank you.
Thank you. Harvey.
Thank you, Chair. I chaired the audit committee last week, and I'd just like to commend the officers for their hard work and their prudent management of our the city's finances for the last year. So, thank you from me.
Thank you for that, Harvey. Okay, if there's no more contributions, thank you, Simon, for that. Moving on to item 14, which is compliance with contract and financial procedures. Who's taking us through that? Sorry? That was coming out, of course, yes. We dealt with that earlier on, of course, didn't we? Okay, just checking you're still awake. Okay, yes, yeah. Stephen certainly is. The rest of you, I'm not so sure. Okay, only joking. Right, it's now time to move to the private part of the agenda, exclusion of press and public. Under Section 100A of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting during discussion of the following item on the grounds that it involves the likely disclosure of exempt information defined in paragraph 3 of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in maintaining the exemption outweighs the public interest in disclosing the information. Are you all in favour of that motion? Yeah, thank you very much.